Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. My name is Ena Lucia Pacheco, and I am a trauma-informed, but more importantly, survivor-informed human security expert and researcher. And for the last decade, I have worked with different agencies around the world for the common goal of raising awareness and stopping different forms of human trafficking around the world. Just a reminder that this presentation could be very triggering. However, it is very important to hear. I highly recommend taking the time with this material. Also have your pen and paper ready to write down any questions or feelings that you might experience during this presentation. Thank you. So last year, I spoke on male victimization of boys and intrafamiliar abuse and trafficking. And this year, we will go more in depth into a few case studies from that research. Over the last few years, I have worked directly with male and female survivors of trafficking, and throughout my research, I heard these stories of child sacrifice and ritual abuse. It was something that I had no idea existed before, and it tore my heart to pieces to learn about what was happening around the world. But the more and more I heard these stories, the more I knew that awareness needed to be raised on this topic. In this presentation, we will examine the complex intersections of human trafficking, focusing on the topics of child sacrifice and ritual abuse. We will explore these dynamics of these crimes, often which are driven by factors of economic desperation and organized crime networks. And these issues represent a significant global challenge involving networks that exploit vulnerable individuals for various purposes, but it could include the illegal trade of people, the collection of human body parts, and the use of children for exploitative and abusive rituals. Throughout this presentation, we aim to foster a deeper understanding of this complex nature of these crimes, the long-term effects and impacts on the victims, and to learn about the ongoing efforts to address and safeguard children who are affected by these crimes. My ultimate goal is to raise awareness of these forms of trafficking and to hear from those victims, but also to consider strategies for prevention and intervention. Today, we will hear from two gentlemen, a frontline expert from Uganda, Africa, and a lived expert from the United States. Let's begin. So in this presentation, we will hear from two very important individuals. We will begin with Ssembatya Alex, who is the founder and CEO of Make a Child Smile, a non-governmental organization established in 2015 with the mission to eradicate child sacrifice, child trafficking, and modern slavery in Uganda. This NGO works with government agencies to rescue, rehabilitate, and reintegrate victims of human trafficking with and outside of Uganda. This organization supports police and the Office of the Director's Public Prosecutors by building the capacity of investigators and prosecutors to be professional during the course of their case, giving justice to the victims of human trafficking. The organization also works closely with different organizations to repatriate remains of victims who died outside the country as a result of this form of human trafficking. And Ssembatya, who I'm about to interview, is a recognized leader in combating human trafficking with over a decade of experience in security and trafficking investigations and operations against transnational organized crime. Throughout his leadership at Make a Child Smile and in collaboration with survivors, international nonprofits, and African law enforcement agencies, he has been instrumental in locating and rescuing thousands of victims and supporting the arrest and successful prosecution of hundreds of suspected human traffickers. And later we will hear from Cranford Blackman, a former Air Force officer, federal agent, police officer, and Army soldier. He has a broad range of experience dealing with criminal safety, law enforcement, anti-terrorism, military combat skills, medical rescue, and developing both disaster response and terrorist response training for the military. And he is also a survivor of child sexual abuse, intrafamilial trafficking, and ritual abuse. Now he speaks and teaches to prevent violence, empowering survivors, and support organizations serving survivors. By combining education and empowerment, his goal is to make a voice for women, children, and indigenous populations. He created a program called Femvincible that helps you see trouble before you're caught into it, allowing you to escape the trouble that you can't avoid, and most importantly, teach you how to prevent being an easy target by those perpetrators in the first place. Cranford uses his passion, lived experience, and Femvincible to reacquaint women with their inherent courage, confidence, power, and the right to safety, respect, and to be heard. He is currently developing a new course for community leaders, first responders, and frontline professionals, teaching them how to create empowering opportunities for survivors and finally come forward and begin their healing journey. I want to thank both these men for their passions and their fight for those that don't have a voice. Let's begin. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Ssembatya, Alex. So let's begin with our questions. What inspired you to work in this field?
Well, yes, thank you so much for having me here. And what really inspired me into doing this, I was inspired by my childhood. How I grew up without so many opportunities. I did not have that fatherly figure or motherly figure. I grew up, literally with everyone. You know, it is the community that grew us. That's why we became what we became. We did not have that opportunity to have a mother or a father sit us down and tell us to do things. So we realized that there are so many other children. I realized that there are so many other children out there who are having the same challenges that I went through as a child. And I really looked for the way how I can actually become an advocate for the children that have no voice. And in doing that, being a Christian person, I realized that I can do more. If I cannot do it with money, I can do it with prayer. If I cannot do it with prayer, I can do it physically as a person. So it was the challenge that I went through as a child that actually helped me to do this. And I love what I'm doing.
Well, thank you for describing that. And our next question is, can you tell me a little bit about your organization and how you combat these crimes?
Well, as Make a Child Smile, we have done a lot. We have done the prevention, we have done rescues, we have done, involvement of different nature. But this is something that we discovered, that after rescuing, after preventing, after intercepting victims of human trafficking or sex trafficking or any sort of that, we realized that we need to go back to the round table and think of what should be done.
And can you give me a particular example of child sacrifice in the context that you work with?
Well, child sacrifice, I think if someone doesn't know what is child sacrifice is a murder, case. Mm-hmm. It's categorized in, murder case and at the same time human trafficking. Mm-hmm. Okay. So child sacrifice, it is where people, especially I would talk about witch doctors.
Yeah.
Witch doctors have that tendency of, when you go there for, you want to get rich, because that is the mindset. People go to witch doctors that they want to be rich. Some of them, if they are barren, they want to give birth to children. Mm-hmm. Some of them who are building construction, they would say, we need to sacrifice for the building. And when they go to the witch doctor will tell them, according to what the spirit says, you need to bring, like they will say, you bring 2 tongues, like tongues of a child. And definitely there's no way you're going to bring the tongue of a child when the child is still alive. Yeah. They would tell you, you need to bring us the heads of a child. 2 heads, that means you have to cut off the head and then you bring the head of a child, and that is actually killing. Mm-hmm. So that is how many children have lost lives, because of people want to please their gods. They want to please their spirits. You find so many. There's a case that happened sometime back in Uganda where one of the rich men, sacrificed the child because of the building he's building. And then you can see how that is happening. And to be honest, this is not happening. I mean, it's not true that when you sacrifice, the building will get finished. We have built buildings where we have not even done anything of that nature, and the building stands.
Mhm.
So it's just a mindset that is in the community or in the ascent. I would say even those are insane, not even an ascent. This is something that
Mhm.
people are just doing. It's not just started, it started a long time ago,
Yeah.
but it's just a mindset that is
Yeah.
within the people in the community.
No, I understand. And do you believe that there's superstitious but also financial motives contributing to child sacrifice?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It's more of people, it is a mindset, like I said. People think that you can even get rich when
Hmm.
you sacrifice. Some people have even offered their own children,
Hmm.
sacrifice them, because they told them once you do this, you're going to be rich.
Yeah.
I did a lot of undercover operations in that context. And I reached this shrine and I went with a girl that I was doing the operation with. And we pretended that we are married and we are looking for a child. And then this guy said, okay, you guys, I can see you need a child. Now you can see how, this thing is really not real. The guy said that, yeah, I can see you guys, you've been in marriage happily, but you have that thing that is missing. You need a child. And yet we explained everything to them. And then he said, I think what you're going to do, you're going to have to sacrifice an animal. They start with animals.
Hmm.
So they told me to bring a goat. I bought two goats. I gave the goats to them. They killed them. They smeared blood on me, and I was of course freaking out. But of course, I was like, let me just do this because I needed to get to know the truth. So eventually, after doing all this, they told me you need now the goats wants to they want you to buy them alcohol. And then I bought beers for them. They drank, and then they told me, now we are going to ask you one last task. Will you do it? And then I told them, what is that? And then they said, now we need you to bring us the blood. And I'm like, okay, if the blood, I can get the blood of, cows, and then I can know. They tell you a blood, they can say, we need the blood of, let's say, for an elephant, which they know you cannot get it.
Hmm.
And then when you say, I cannot get it, and then they would ask you, how about if you give us a blood of either a child that is close, like who is in your lineage? Like, let's say your relative.
Hmm.
That's what they will ask you. So they asked me to give them, like, if I cannot find what they wanted, I should give them a blood of a child who is in my lineage.
Yeah.
So I realized that they're actually sending me to kill.
Hmm.
So they give you two options. If you cannot bring, give us money, we bring. So if you give them money, definitely they will kill the child.
Hmm.
And before you know it, they bring the head of a child. So I told them I'm going to come back, and then I make my mind because I don't have money. I have to look for money. That's how we arrested all of them.
Yeah.
So if I had given them time to actually go with the
Hmm.
idea of sacrificing, trust me, I would not forgive myself.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah,
That's very brave to even put yourself through something like that. But that leads me to my next one is how do you and your organization collaborate with law enforcement and other agencies to address these issues?
we have done a lot of trainings working with the DPP's office or DPP's office. We have done so many trainings with the migration, with military themselves, military sector, because we realize that military, sometimes they are not investigating cases,
Yeah.
yes, but they are in most cases, they are at the borders. So we train them how they can detect human trafficking.
Hmm.
They can detect the victims of human trafficking because they pass them, many times, and they're like, that's girl passed here.
Yeah.
So we are trying to, to take that out. so that we get them trained and get to know what is supposed to be done. Then also immigration. We have seen cases happening at the migration phase when we are seeing everything happening, because immigration, much as they are, because we used to know that human trafficking is happening probably at the cross borders, at not at the airports, but even at the airports, human trafficking is happening there, and it is being done by these very people, so-called immigration. So we decided to train them, and also them to know, much as they know, but they may not know well. We take them to trainings and let them know that even them aiding human trafficking, they are making a crime.
Yeah.
So in doing that, we have seen at least some impact being done. Yeah. So like the question, to answer the question, we have collaborated with law enforcement in terms of prevention, in terms of training, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And what kind of psychological or social impacts are there on the survivors of this ritual abuse? And how does this impact them trying to be reintegrated into society afterwards?
Wow, that is really a very, very good question. Of course, I can tell you that such acts don't leave survivors the same.
Yeah.
Some get depressed due to the trauma experienced, and when you see these abuses, sometimes some start feeling as though they are no longer needed in the society, because of course what happened to them is really terrible, and sometimes people get to know it. So it is our work as the organizations, as CEOs, to make sure that these people are handled well, because we try very much to show them that it's not their fault, that this happened to them. We make sure that we also train the community to receive them with warm hands, because they are victims.
Yeah.
And anyone can become a victim, and we tell people that anyone can become a victim. So these abuses distorted to health and physical appearance of some survivors, which lowers their self-esteem, and they start feeling that inferior in the society. They feel like they are not needed. They feel like they did the biggest crime in the whole world. Societies that are understanding and non-judgmental make life easier for the survivors to settle in. And this greatly affects how fast the survivor will completely heal and from the trauma and damage caused as compared those that are judgmental. There are some society where they're like, it was your fault. Why did you have to go there? So we're trying to make sure that these people get to understand that, it's not their wish that they were supposed to be there, So every survivor needs a great support system to overcome the effects of the abuse, so that so a society that is willing to move the journey with the survivor makes the reintegration process very easy. Yeah. So therefore, communities and organizations can be best support in this journey of restoration by encouraging the survivors in whatever they plan to pursue to do it. They need to be there to encourage them. They need to be there to speak to them. What I have realized that survivors, it's not a one day.
Yeah.
It's not a one day talk and it's okay. No, I have sat with some of the survivors, especially child sacrifice survivors. There's a case I worked on, and this case was really very hard for me to take on. This young girl, as 7 years, she was taken to the bush, and she could see this man, the man who was, with her, who kidnapped her, could see him bringing people and kill them in front of her. And not only that, rapes them. After raping them, rapes her, as 7 years as she is. When I was talking to her, she was laughing. I didn't even know that she was raped until when I spoke to her directly and asked her. I sent actually a female person and one of our female lady, and she went there. She asked her, but tell me what happened. She began to narrate a story that this guy used to rape me every day because we got this man with 3 bodies. He had already killed some and put them underneath the shrine, kept them there, and she was now waiting for a day to reach, and then she be killed. That's when she survived. She ran away, and then people came, and then stuff like that. That's how she was helped, and then we arrested the person, and that person is still in custody. So, but like I told you, this girl, right now when you talk to her, she laughs, she smiles. But like I told you, sometimes factors, like the push factors, these people uses the advantage of the vulnerability of the communities, and they get those children because like right now when you go where the child is, she needs a lot of help. Where she's in the same community where the incident happened, something can still happen again. That's why there's a need of a community to be sensitized very much to help these survivors to, not to forget, but to be relieved, to know that this happens, it can happen to anyone else, and it's the way to go. She needs to get to her feet, and so organizations should also make sure survivors are willing to speak out during sensitization period or sensitization programs, because if they speak out, that's when you can actually understand what really, how much it hurt that person, how much it is deep. I always encourage people to be listeners. Let them listen to them. Let them give them a listening ear so that they can pour out their stuff. Sometimes when I am interviewing a survivor, I always take time to even take them out, give them a very good, environment after, them laughing, eating, and I'm like, okay, tell me what happened. You can trust me. And because you've built that trust, they will be able to speak out, and that healing process will begin. But until that one is done, it's very hard. Yeah.
I am so inspired by your work, and thank you for the stories that you were mentioning. And I understand how the children can go through a phase of like dissociation where their brain is protecting them from those traumas, losing those memories in a way on purpose so that they're not traumatized every single day. And maybe when they're older and they're able to process it with healing and support, those memories could come up. But it's really inspiring to know that those children can still laugh today and still play today and still be children in some aspects of their life. And as you said, healing, it comes like ocean waves, where it's some days are easier than others, some days are harder. It is a lifelong process, but it's good to know that the support from the community has to be from all sides. Knowledge building, capacity building has to happen from all sides, from the medical sector to the law enforcement involved to the NGOs that you work with, the grassroots, the families. That is so, so important. And for supporting the disclosures like you're doing in such a trauma-informed manner, actively listening, it gives dignity and respect back to not only those children, but they're going to remember that as adults and know Ssembatya, Alex, he helped
Yeah.
me. He is my hero in some ways. He gave me this new life back, and that I'm so inspired by that. And so I want to end with asking you, what would you like to tell our audience, and what's like a call to action that you would like from those listening today?
We really need to come up with a strategy that would help these victims, especially survivors, because we need to start skilling them. We need to skill them, and the only way we can skill them is to get them things to use, like materials to use, which needs funding. And I would request everyone to support us, and we bring the services to the community, to the survivors, to empower the communities, because that's what we are actually fighting for. And right now we are building a shelter for the victims and survivors. the reason why we need this shelter very much is that we have lost so many cases in the court, because why? Because these victims or survivors, sometimes the perpetrators take advantage of their vulnerability because they are in the same community where they found them. The case is ongoing. They would just go and tell them, you know what, let me just give you some money and you leave this case. And then they give them some coins or some, little money, $2, $5, even if it's how much. And they will lose morale, they will lose, interest in the case, and they end up, they are the witness, remember, the case will die. So we are now trying to bring this shelter to help those victims so that we can at least we bring justice to them. Yeah. So we are building our shelter. It's almost halfway done, and we believe we can finish it. And also we are building a clinic, which is going to be basically for the community. It's going to be free. We have people who are willing, doctors who are willing to give services, but we don't have where to bring the services to the community. So we are building a shelter at the same time, the clinic as well, which is going to be free for the children, basically, not for adults, for the children, because we are looking at the children as a vulnerable community. So we want these children to be able to access medical. But because the community, they lack that provision, we want to be the answer to that. So whoever wants to come and support the funding or whatever funds they will have given will go towards the shelter and the clinic as well. And also we need volunteers. If they are there and they would love to come and volunteer with us, please just come and, go and sit with the children, dance with the children. We can take you to our schools where we have memorandum of understanding. Train them. Let them test another person's experience. We have children that really need to hear your voice, and your voice can make a difference.
Yeah. That is absolutely incredible, Ssembatya. Thank you so much for your time, for what you're doing in your community, for how you're helping not only adults, but children, especially of these crimes. And thank you so much for answering these questions. And I really encourage the audience to look up this amazing organization in Uganda, look at their website, look at the things that they're doing. And thank you so much for your time today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Cranford. It's so lovely to have you here today with us.
Well, thanks for having me. I am just excited to be here and to get to share some of my story to help everyone understand this horrible thing that does happen even in our country.
Thank you so much. And so we'll dive right into our questions for today. So let's begin. Ritual abuse, especially satanic ritual abuse, is something we hardly ever hear about. And why do you think that is?
Back in the 80s, there seemed to be a rash of that here in the US, but it seemed like it happened in some of the more populated areas like Hollywood. And the reporters that covered that ended up looking at it more as kind of like a mass hysteria. And it's really sad because I'm sure that things did happen to people, just as it happened to me, but investigators, reporters were debunking the reports of survivors of those sorts of things. And I think that is carried over today. Even when I look up articles or videos about the types of things that I've experienced, when I look it up, the most of what I find is things that explain how that stuff is not true, that it doesn't happen. And it's really quite the challenge for me to read that maybe it's the popular opinion that my experiences didn't happen. And, I'm sure that's the case for a lot of survivors, to have someone tell them your story's not real. It's difficult. And I think that's part of why a lot of people won't share their stories. I don't want to sound crazy. I mean, it's easy for people to believe me when I share that I was trafficked as a child, but that I was being used in a satanic cult, doing really weird things. Well, that starts leaning me into an area that sounds kind of crazy. And, none of us want to sound crazy, especially when we're telling a horrible story like that. We don't know what our friends are going to think. We don't know what our family's going to think. Will our job be okay keeping someone that has had that happen employed? So there's a lot of reasons for it to stay quiet. Um, and of course, not to mention the things that predators would have done to, like they did to me, uh, to help me, to get me to stay quiet and not speak about it. Because as long as they can stay in the dark and get people to believe that what they do doesn't happen, they can basically keep doing their crimes with no one even looking for them.
Yeah, it can be very triggering. But as that results in our next question of how did you become involved in this?
It was my dad. I mean, as you know, we've talked about familial trafficking. Uh, but sure enough, that was part of my trafficking, that my dad put me into those situations. And I think, like, the hysteria of the 80s about this stuff, people had the idea that, it always seems to involve rich people or powerful people or politicians. And I guess that's part of where it's easy to go, well, maybe they just want attention. Maybe they want to file lawsuits against these wealthy people or get their, few minutes of fame. But, you know, where this stuff happened to me was rural. I mean, this was back in the 60s, and out in the country. So the thing was, and I really believe that my dad was not a good person. He had a darkness to him. Uh, Throughout my life, I can think of times where it just seemed to bring him joy to hurt somebody, not physically, but to energetically, take away their joy, or they're happy about something and for him to say something to destroy that. And I think that was part of why he ended up getting connected with a group like he did. And for him to be there, to get to be put up on a pedestal to prove how important he was. And I was the price of admission for that. So yeah, that's how I got brought into this terrible story.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Cranford. And did you always remember what had happened?
It's interesting. I'm very grateful that I did not remember a lot of it. Uh, when I was a child, because the things that happened to me started when I was in diapers. I wasn't even really walking yet. Uh, but, around first grade, a little bit before the first grade, I would remember what I thought were horrible dreams of what was happening, what people were doing to me. And I just tried to block them out of my head. Now, as an adult, I can look back and go, there's no way any child should have had any of that in his world. He would have no idea to be able to have a dream that terrible about what adults were doing to him. The ritual stuff that was going on around the mind control stuff, or more of mind manipulation, sort of gaslighting like a narcissist does.
Mhm.
So those are the things I had in my mind, but I held them as memories of nightmares.
Mhm.
But then later on, late into my adult life, I think I was 52 when I started having the big memories of it. I was reading stories of survivors of domestic abuse. And, when I saw the symptoms that they would experience in adulthood from what happened in children, I kind of chuckled to myself. I'm like, that's weird. That sounds like me. It sounds like they're describing me. And as I read along, suddenly it's like the door in my head to my memories cracked open for a moment, and I just saw horror after horror after horror. And that's when I was absolutely certain that I did not have those nightmares as a child, that they were the real thing. And, back again to why don't we hear about it? Why don't people talk about it when it happens to them? Even for me, when I remembered And I just have to guess that this was part of the mind games that they would play with me to get me to stay quiet about it. As soon as I remembered, I was sitting on the couch in my living room. My wife is in the kitchen cooking something, and all of a sudden I could barely breathe. I couldn't speak. I could not speak at all. And it felt like there were claws of something digging into my throat, reminding me or screaming at me that you will not talk about this. And my wife saw me and she's like, "Are you okay?" I couldn't even answer her. All I could do is shake my head no. But she came over and, sat with me to help me kind of come out of that place. And I did. So between that and then some therapy that I went to, uh, I learned even more of what
Mhm.
happened. And I wasn't too happy to keep on learning that there was more and more and worse things that people like that are willing to do to children.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Cranford. And I'm really starting to see how dissociation and how the brain really uses kind of memory loss as a survival mechanism for so many years, especially in childhood, just so you can be able to kind of keep living. We heard like similar stories in the research, and it really seems to be that mechanism to be able to progress. But of course, at some point in time, there will be a trigger that reminds us of all those things. And I just want to remind the audience that these questions have been discussed about before, so I'm not springing anything on Cranford. But please, whatever you are comfortable with sharing, can you share some of those memories with us?
Yes, let me grab my mental health toy that we talk about.
Mhm.
For those of you who are in mental health work, you know what it is to watch somebody dissociate. And even, at my age now, to share some of this can end up making me, you know, want to go away mentally. So I actually have a thing that tickles my hands and it helps me to stay present. Uh, but some of I don't want to graphically shock anyone. I wouldn't want to put into your head the horrible stuff that happened. Uh, and it is horrible. I mean, if you were to try to think of the worst thing you could, I'm pretty sure what happened was worse, because it included rooms full of people doing things. It included males doing things after females groomed me for those events. And then afterwards, the mind games of being mothered, you know, "Oh, you did great. You're such a good boy. This is good for you." After, being used, well, it was sexual abuse, uh, in ritual, and it wasn't always just, it wasn't always just sex stuff. There was like the degrading part of sex stuff. Now, it doesn't make sense to try to degrade a child who is 1.5 or 2. They don't get it. Uh, it really is my thought that what these people were doing in their cult was to prove to the darkness that they worshiped, depending on what your religion is, that's going to have different names, but for them, it was the devil. If they were going to prove to the devil how much they supported, and worshiped the devil, the best way they could do it is to destroy something pure that would symbolize the divine, something that's pure. And that meant to not just do things that were degrading, but painful for, uh, what they would assume, I would guess, is painful for God or whatever, your name for that divinity is, to watch happen to someone like me, an innocent child of, 2 years old. Um, so there were things that included dead animals, that included you know what? It's just horrible enough to hear right there. I don't think I'll go into more of that, but it was something that happened over and over. It wasn't a one-time thing. Um, and it's just, yeah, it's shocking. It's difficult for me to even think about. I can still see some of the images I remembered of the masks that they wore, the people around me, of the proximity and what they were doing. You know, multiple people doing things all at once to this one child. But yeah, I'll just leave it there. Anything more than that, I think would probably be more than anyone would want to bear listening to.
Well, thank you, Cranford, so much for just for being willing to share even that small little part. And I know that it's huge, actually. It's I'm really sorry you went through that, and I'm here with you. And we've had this friendship for a long time, but thank you for sharing that with our audience. It's going to be impactful, and it's even for me when I hear about it. But thank you again. Which leads me to our next question of what can leaders, researchers, investigators, or even family members or close friends do to not make it worse for a survivor when they decide to disclose that type of abuse?
I think the key thing to do is to realize at first that it's a huge step to come forward and say, hey, this happened to me, because that's already stepping over all those fears of, will everyone think I'm crazy? Are they going to think I'm on drugs? Are they going to think I'm just wanting attention? All those things that we already talked about. So if someone is opening up to you, whether you're a researcher or an investigator or a family member or close friend, I think the best thing to do is to accept that they believe this happened. And of course, you know, their memories can't be exact. There's no way mine can be exact. It was happening to me when I was 1.5 and 2 and 3 and 4, uh, with adults doing it on purpose. When I say it, I mean controlling my environment so that I would be confused, so that I would be afraid, so that things didn't make sense. I mean, that's pretty standard operating procedure in a lot of uh, manipulation or abusive environments. Because if you can take away the believability of your victim, it keeps you safe. Um, well, I kind of went off on the side there. What was the question?
Don't worry, Cranford. It is, what can we do to not make it worse for a
Oh, that's right.
survivor?
That's right. So to hear their story and understand that for that person, it's completely real.
Yeah.
And it's dangerous to share it. Some of us were told, if you share this, your family's going to die.
Mhm.
If you share this, God will hate you. You'll never make it to heaven. So it's a huge risk for that person to share, and a difficult thing to share. So one, I would say the most important thing is don't ask for details.
Mhm.
Be willing to say, share all you're comfortable to share, and you can stop there. I mean, like I say, it's bad enough to have it in your head, but then to speak it out loud and hear it again, even for myself.
Mhm.
Uh, and it might be that they, just like me, wouldn't want to burden their family or friends with the horrors that they've never even imagined. I mean, you can watch horror movies, you know, day after day, and you'll never see the sort of stuff that happens in those places. Um, so yeah, just to be open to hearing them, be open to believing them, and to keep a safe space for them, that you don't share their story. You don't need to tell your friend at work. You don't need to tell your sister. You know, none of that. It needs to be the place that they can trust you, because at that age, we had our trust destroyed.
Mhm.
You know, the people that are supposed to take care of me, dad, the adults, they didn't take care of me. They were the perpetrators.
Mhm.
And so yeah, their trust is a challenge for me even today. But yeah, so that's what I would go with. Just be open, give them the safe place, and respect the privacy of what they have to share.
Thank you for those words of advice, Cranford. And let's end with a little bit of hope. Is there some hope for those that have experienced these type of horrors?
I'm going to say yes, because here I am. I made it through all of that. And for those of us who go through trauma, sometimes we end up with a little bit of a twisted sense of humor, but it's part of the way that we can get through, talking about such things. So, if you hear a survivor being a little bit twisted in their humor, don't judge them too harshly. It's part of how we keep from falling into the darkness and staying there. But yes, I think it is. I have a few friends who are survivors of satanic abuse. Not that I grew up with them, I met them as adults. So I was really shocked to find out some of the similarities of what happened to them. But them and me, we're okay. We have good relationships with our spouses. We have jobs that we work and we do well at. We're appreciated by our neighbors and coworkers. So yes, it is possible to have hope. And if you can be one of the people that allows a survivor to open up a little and let some of that dark, horrible pressure out, even if it's just for a moment, I mean, that makes you part of that person's hope. That makes you part of that person's healing, even if
Yeah.
it's just a little bit.
Yeah. And to go with the hope and the healing aspect, from what I understand, it is a lifelong process, and it is a commitment to work on yourself, to go through that. It's not just like you're fixed one day, as we all know, a lot of us that have gone to therapy. But I'm so proud of your journey and where you are now, and how you've become now a lighthouse and a symbol for male and female survivors around the world, for hope and healing in particular. And so, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Well, I will say one, I appreciate you so much. I mean, that you step into the darkness for people like me to share with the world, that there is hope, and to remind the world that there are bad things, but knowing that there's bad things and knowing that there's hope too, it's a big difference than just seeing the dark and that's it. So yes, I appreciate you and all of you watching. I appreciate that you took the time to listen and to hear my story. And yeah, I'm just grateful that there are so many people who care and want to know and want to help. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cranford.